Oh, I'm way off to the side. I shouldn't be. There. You saw nothing. There we go. Oh, and I'm getting a phone call. That's embarrassing. Let's find out what it is. Hello? 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 Cool. Hello, you're live with the world. Hello. So, hey, how's it going? I hope that everybody is having a good time. I hope that I'm coming in okay. That everything is worrying not. Hey, Kaylin. Thanks so much for that. We're going to talk about something that's a little controversial today. And controversial in kind of a good way. I anticipate that today we're going to have a whole bunch of conversations specifically. Oh, there we go. There's a train. And I'm getting the phone call again. Let's find out. It's from Manitoba. Hello? Hi. Hi. Yes, I did. It's for 7 o'clock. Okay, I did call. I'd set it for 7. I did call in advance. If you can't do anything, then I guess just give it to the driver and I'll talk to Uber myself. But then we'll just take it now. We'll take it now then. Yeah, we'll just take it now. Okay, thanks. Bye. Well, I appreciate the hype train. That's what you get. We have things happening here after the stream, so I thought, oh, I'll save some time. I'll order some food. I placed a scheduled order. I called the restaurant to make sure that it was scheduled, and now the driver is already there. And I do not want to steal money out of the driver just because Uber Eats messed up. So, hey, thanks, Kaylin. And, oh, geez, and Baldwin and Lord Wesley and just all kinds of people. Thank you so much. And Erwin with all those gift subs. So, yeah, it means that the food's going to get here early, which means that I will just end up having to eat cold food. Anyway, we'll see what we can do. But Erwin specifically, hey, Jean, Erwin specifically sent me a tweet, which I thought was this fascinating tweet that involved somebody creating a contract that they wanted to show people that would be a contract that the GM would give players that they would end up needing to read and agree to before. Thanks, Kate, for that. That's very appreciated. To see what people thought of it. And this tweet is, to say the least, it's a little bit controversial. It seems that there's a lot of things that this does right. It also seems that there's a lot of things that it does wrong. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at this GM player agreement that's been circulating the tweeters, and we're going to see what we would specifically do, how I would change it, how you would change it, and whether even a contract like this is even necessary at all. So I think that just before we're going to start by reading the whole thing out, but just before we do, I did want to make sure that you knew that I do think that there is a lot in here that's really worthwhile. And I think that there's some things in here which I believe I would disagree with almost entirely. And there's a couple of things in here that I think are things that are supposed to be understated instead of overstated. The overall tone is what I actually have the most issue with, but no matter what, let's say let's see what happens when we get into it. Bits badge tier notification. What the heck does that mean? It is sometimes nice to have paper to refer back to, but anyway, let's actually take a look at this. Let's read it out. Let's see what it says, and then we'll see what we can do to make changes to it. So we're going to go over here. This is what I actually used in order to do the character creation for Exalt Witch Academy. So we're still going to have the logo at the bottom. Consider that free advertising. But I took that. I took the tweet and I did an character recognition so that I could get it into an editable state. So there may be errors in here. If there are, I'll fix them. I did change some grammatical errors, but I tried to keep the original wording consistent because I want to make sure that we get the accurate representation of what this said originally. And then we're going to see what we can do beyond that. So let's have a look at the GM player agreement. Heroes aren't born. Here, you know what? Let's get some. Do we keep the music for this? Yeah, we'll keep the music for this. You could slip a version of this without the EXA logo. I only just sort of realized it as I was setting this up. I'm completely okay with Exalt Witch Academy being on the screen right now. That's not a huge issue. Change to epic music. I could probably actually do that. So here, let's get some epic music going. Thanks to our epidemic sound. We can do that. So here we'll pause it here. I'm gonna go over here and let's see. All right. So we want epic, right? Want stuff that feels like super epic? I think we can find that. Heroes aren't born, they're forged, forced by extraordinary circumstances to rise above and shaped by the world they inhabit. My goal as a GM is to create a positive, engaging, and challenging environment for your imagination and creativity to thrive in. However, I cannot achieve this without your help. The intent of this contract is to ensure that we are all on the same page when it comes to the expectations to be at my table. My GM style: effective over optimization. I believe any character build is viable as long as it's intentional and complementary to your teammates. I like meaningful choices. Build a character that is consistent in their character choices and fits with both their backstory and the campaign setting. I like the world. I generally expect your characters to fit within the world. The player's guide will give you hints about how to fit in with the story. I like crunch. Understanding the rules is important to me. I'm only human. I'm going to make mistakes or bad calls. I'm just trying to make the best decisions I can. Understanding the rules would be a huge help to me and takes some of the pressure off. Your choices have consequences. Keep in mind that my goal is to make the world and the people feel like a living world and are not just there for your benefit. Finding ways to learn their motivations, likes, dislikes, to appeal to them will benefit you, and thank you for that hype train. Player expectations / recommendations. Have fun. Although I'd like you guys to take this seriously, it is just a game and should be a fun experience. Be effective. Have an idea of how your character behaves during combat, exploration, and downtime. Figure out how your build works with the party and can complement it. Make choices that enhance your character's tactics. Be engaged. Pay attention, participate, contribute. Figure out what you already know. Recall knowledge/lore, perception/sense motive, notes, etc. Understand the situation. Clarify with GM, NPCs, or players. Talk to other players, character to character, to learn what they know or get their input on the situation. Tell a story. Figure out cool, interesting ways to share pieces of your character and backstory. Know what things you're about to open up, that you're open about, and things you want to save until later. Dropping clues or hints about your backstory/motivations will encourage others to ask questions. Give short descriptions when you do things, especially new things. Be the drama. Be the hero. Engage with other characters to learn about the story they are trying to tell. Backstory, reactions/opinions of the current situation, and thoughts for the future. How are they feeling? Fail forward. Help the flow of combat. Know what your character will do on their turn before their turn starts. Look up feats, spells, abilities, or skills before your turn or the session. Know how they work, and if unclear, then double check with GM, preferably out of session. 15 sec rule. If you don't choose what you're going to do within 15 seconds, your turn will be skipped. Learn the lore of the world and the people in it. This will help build characters that fit within the themes of the world. Talk with NPCs. Keep notes. Make lists of personal and group goals. Know what you're trying to do in the story. Keep track of your gear, found items, and things you'll want to buy/sell. If things seem out of place or stand out to you, write it down. It might be important. Do your best to remember names, locations, objects, etc. Encourage each other to play and shine. Know when it's appropriate to make jokes and when it's not. Make sure everyone is sharing their thoughts and role-playing. Assuming that others are role-playing. If they are doing/saying things you don't like, assume it's part of that character's personality and deal with it in character. Do not Google anything about the campaign. All the information you need to know is in the player's guide or will be revealed during gameplay. Any questions about the world or things related to the story should be done in character or with GM directly. Recommendations. Have an idea of what class choices/feats you'll be making about 1 to 2 levels ahead. This will help you make prerequisite choices as well as speed up leveling up. Build likable characters. The party should want to adventure with you. Build effective characters. Pick a concept, choose 2 to 3 things you are very good at, and build around that. Build a diverse party. Using different weapons, armor, skill upgrades, etc. will help with splitting up loot and make your party able to handle a variety of situations. And that's it. That is all all that's given to us. And I'm being messaged again. Fresh file. All right. Well, let's get that fresh file real quick, so that we look good, right? Do we want to look good? Who doesn't want to look good? We're gonna download that real quick, and we're gonna change this out. Oops. Let's fix this See, this is why I shouldn't be doing this at this time. Let's see. Clinic top is going to be that. And the topic. It's going to go right up there. There we go. All right. We've got a few elements from Discord. We should see if we can bring those up. Let's see here. So, from Grubermensch, collaboratively creating a doc like this from a session 0 is totally an option, but I think it starts to fall into the design by committee trap. If you have people with irreconcilable differences, just differences, doesn't have to be hostility, that's not a problem you can solve by talking it out. The right move there is to say, well, this won't be the right game for everyone. We also have from Gil Adgood, I think this contract should be replaced by a session 0, where you talk about the subjects this contract addresses, maybe some of the ideas that work for your group, maybe all of it, maybe none. But you should talk, come to an agreement, and if someone breaks the agreement, talk about it with them. Instead of the GM just flat out saying, this is my way of doing things. Either accept it, or we can't play at all. Even if a lot what? Yeah. We're getting a lot of things being pushed in here. Weirdness says, I saw someone bring up a good point about how this is all focused on the GM, how this is the game they run, that the players should help them do that, but there's nothing saying how the GM will cater to the players. The Crosshair's initial thought is, caveat out of you do you, boo, that is very important, your table, your game. I'm of the I don't get the use for it camp. That is to say, why would I need to get into a contract over a game when this could just be handled in session 0 with Wordhole? See where I stand after stream / hashtag open mind. And then Grubermensch says, I think my critique of this doc specifically would be that it puts a lot of you must do this on the players and very little on the GM side. I've done docs like this for campaigns I run, but my goal is to focus on the feel of the gameplay rather than a big list of must-dos. Though if you really do have must-dos, it's good to be clear about them up front. So, how do I feel about this this document? How do I feel about the GM player agreement? I will freely admit right here, right now, that I think this document is way too aggressive. I agree with what other people are saying, that this is essentially a document which, if I also, if I wanted to check the word count, this is 778 words that is essentially telling players what the GM expects. Wes, thank you all for CTS. Literally life-saving, getting me through my notice period. It's not much, but still a little something. Thanks. Thank you so much, Wes. Just know that, of course, we really appreciate you having here. And I'm just glad that you found something that you really enjoyed. It's very kind. Thank you. I especially love how I imagine that donation was probably done in pounds sterling, because I'm not sure what the significance of 1389 is in US dollars, but yeah, I imagine that that's a currency exchange. Now I notice what this reminds me of. When I was a GM, I asked for some background info from players and get a J.R.R. Tolkien book. Yeah. GBP. Cool. So Kaylin says, this document can also be a way to open up the conversation about player GM expectations. That can lead into a session 0 for sure, but at least there can be negotiation between GM and players via this contract. It's not these rules must be obeyed. So that's the first thing that I would do. This is listed as an agreement or a contract, and I think that is entirely the wrong way to look at it. An agreement kind of assumes that we're laying things down as rules to be followed, as a thing that we are collaboratively deciding on together to move forward. Hey, Artemis, it's good to see you too. And I think that that's a very aggressive tone to take with players. If this was a mass LARP where we had, say, 500 people, and we had to be absolutely certain that everybody was going to agree to certain safety rules, that everyone was going to agree to participate in a certain way because we didn't have the time to have GMs talk it out with players in the course of play, especially if this was like a convention game, then yes, an agreement or a contract might be very appropriate at that time. But this is something for people sitting down and playing a tabletop role-playing game. And if you come to me right away with, hey, this is a fun activity that we're all supposed to do, but you have to sign this waiver before we can do it, this agreement, this contract, that's putting it really on the wrong foot for me. I think that a lot of the things that are in this document are tips that we've given out here on RPG Clinic's Clinic Hours. I think that that's entirely true, but I also know that that I would not pepper players with 800 words of do this, because the other thing is, as has already been said, this has nothing specifically that is, this is what I'm going to do for you. This is what can you do for me. And that's a little bit dangerous, I think. Wes's final overall thoughts: lots of demands on players, but not much of what the GM promises in return. Seems like the DM has a very fixed way of wanting to run this game, which, whilst fair, it is not really taking into account what other players want. I sense the party could get toxic, limitations on player agency and choice. I sense the DM may go, your character would not do that, and also would limit player character creation choices, whilst there are very useful things mentioned. And alluded to, okay, there's more. And alluded to, such as take notes and tell a story, and alluding to the fact that it is cooperative. A session 0 would be more productive and helpful. Also, no mention of lines and veils, and a deal with it in character attitude does not bode too well in case people feel unsafe. So, definitely something in that. Zesty says, the contract reads as someone trying to damage control before the game. This person, while reasonable, has clearly been burned by a campaign and is trying to assuage it from happening again. Ericwin asks, does anyone's opinion change if this is a document drafted for the use of someone who is a professional GM being hired by people who may or may not be experienced with the game to run a game for them? My opinion changes that if it's a professional game, that likens it a little bit more towards towards a convention game or a mass LARP. In those situations, you want to spend less time talking with your players and more time kind of saying, this is what we all have to agree to before we start. Because if I'm being paid, then one of the things that I'll point out is, as a GM or a storyteller, my work is not just when we sit down to play. It's preparing for the game, answering player questions, adjudicating rules, adjudicating character sheets, going over people's backstories, which is part of the preparation. There's a whole lot of work to be done. And putting something like this and saying, look, this is all stuff that you got to agree to before I'm willing to step in and do this, kind of helps, because then it also gives me an out. Because I also, even if I'm getting paid, have no interest playing in a game that violates some of the rules that I consider inviolate. So that is a bit different, because then it becomes a negotiation and a contract. And because money is exchanging hands, it's good to set some ground rules. This is still basically me saying, if you want to have fun with me, you got to agree to this shit. And that's a bit dangerous. Requiem says, I also feel he's a bit all over the place too. I mean, effective over optimization does not feel like a GM style. It's more of a, this is the type of players I want to see, and does not necessarily apply to their GM style. And Pukajutsu says, I don't want to build a straw man here, but I'm getting strong vibes that if you ask the GM what they provided, you'd hear them reason that GMing is a service. See, that is in fact the feeling that I get from this. It feels like this person is saying, you are lucky enough to get to play in my game, so therefore this is what you have to agree to. This is what you need to say is possible for you before I will accept you into my game. Well, let's go over this now. Let's go over this kind of more piece by piece, and we'll figure out what we can do, what I like about this, what I don't like about this, and also what I would send out. Because the first thing I will say is this is way too long. This is too long and too detailed for this is something that you should know before coming into one of my games. So Kate mentions, and this is kind of where I'm going to lead to eventually, is that some form of verbal or written contract is wise, but tone is important. And I think that it is important, if I'm playing with people I've never played with before, that I'm going to want them to know some things about how I want to play, and also for them to know what things they can expect out of the game as well. But I don't necessarily know if this is the way to do it. Either way, we'll go through this and see. Lord Wesley says, my comment on effective over optimization. What is the difference between effective and optimized? Where does the line change from one to the other? Does this mean you have to play a useful character? Intentional means people make character choices based on effectiveness rather than roleplay. This is fine. As to complementary, it is a bit vague. But I do understand that make all members of the party feel useful is good. Also, with any build being viable, I'll play pun. So, a real brick wall here with my new moderator chatter agreement. No jazz music, give me snacks, always be cute. Anyway, I just got here. What's up with this game contract thing? Fair enough. And okay, so it looks like we're just going to go with questions for now. Aragorn says, second incendiary question, is it possible that negative reactions to this are because folks have had a bad experience with a GM in the past who did not establish their expectations at the start of game and then chastised players for not meeting them from the top? Some comments on the thread make me think that they ran into these expectations after the fact and felt negatively about being corrected. I don't know if this is an incendiary question. I believe that the person who wrote this has their heart in the right place. I don't think that they intended to sort of say, this is me as a GM, accept me, but that's how it comes across. I don't think that they meant to say that our fun has to be defined by legalese, but that's how it's coming across. I think that there's stuff that we can do to help this out, but let's have a look. It starts in this paragraph here, and this paragraph starts out kind of strong. It has like a, my goal as a GM and heroes aren't born. Like all of this stuff is kind of like a neat little intro that sort of, when I first read this, it kind of got me into like, okay, well, this person seems to be doing some like helpful ways to sort of step me into this, which I can appreciate. Pookajuice is a slight tangent. Some of these are the unwritten rules. Do you feel it's best that some of them remain unwritten? I feel that some of them are best communicated, not on paper. So we'll see what those are in a second. Requiem Law says, I will say one thing I do not like is build a diverse party. Using different weapons, armor, skill upgrades, etc. will help with splitting up loot and make your party able to handle a variety of situations. I mean, it's useful to make a diverse party, but it seems to be like he's saying, it's your job to make my job easier. So yeah, okay. So I will say we're going to get to this. We have to actually go through it. I can't just kind of keep pulling this, but I am, because it's interesting. But you're talking about the very last point here, which we'll get to. Trust me, we will get there. So it starts with a nice little thing. I definitely think that starting with hey, I'm really excited to be playing with you, and I hope that you're excited to be playing with me, is a great thing to lead off with. That kind of tone can really make a difference when it comes to, yeah, I know it's I'm not blaming you, Aragorn, I'm blaming myself. I'm an internet pretend doctor. I'm not even a pretend doctor. I'm an internet pretend orderly. I think that, getting somebody excited is really important, especially for something that is eventually going to lead into, here are some expectations. So getting somebody feeling good about things is a great way to start. However, I cannot achieve this without your help, and the intent of this contract is to ensure that we're all on the same page when it comes to expectations to be at my table. So right away, my table is a dangerous way to put this. I've been guilty of this in the past, and I don't think it's necessarily terrible to sort of define it as like, if you're running the game, this is kind of like how you would handle a thing. But I do think that I do think that there is something to be said about there is something to be said about if you're like, well, welcome to my table, my rules. This doesn't give the impression that this is a negotiation, that this is a back and forth, that they get to deal with them as well. It's a little bit dangerous. This language is making me feel worried. The other thing is the intent of this contract is to ensure we're all on the same page. So again, they're calling this a contract. I would immediately just change this to, this is to make sure we're all on the same page. You can just say that, and immediately the language is less threatening. The other thing is saying, my goal as a GM is to create a positive, engaging, and challenging environment for your imagination and creativity to thrive in. This feels like corporate speak, and that makes me worried because I want, this is a game and I want the game to be fun. So I would replace all this with role-playing is a ton of fun as long as we all contribute to the fun. Well, don't put it like, role-playing is an amazing experience as long as we all contribute to the fun. This is to make sure we're all on the same page. And I would take this out because we're now shortening this. It doesn't need the prologue, even though I kind of like this, but we're trying to keep this short. So I would immediately sort of take that out. I would also change the title, but we're going to deal with that once we figure out what we've got. So it's less than Changeling the Streaming's runtime. Yeah, play it my way or get out is a very dangerous thing. All right. Real Brickwall says, I think the primary problem with this contract is that it seems to have been written by and delivered by one person to a group rather than a charter that's cooperatively drafted. And this is something that I agree with. I would definitely want to make sure when I was handing it off to somebody to say like, hey, if you want to add or change or remove things, let me know, because we should. So I agree. Gaming is a group activity, and unless you're hiring somebody like a GM, it should be treated as a group activity. Remember, the storyteller or GM or DM may be a special person at the table in that they have different responsibilities and different actions. And you could make the argument, although I'm uncomfortable with the language, but you could make the argument that they are the most important person at the table because kind of the game sort of revolves around their sort of foundation. They're still just a part of a group. They are, in fact, no more important than anybody at the table in a lot of ways. They're just specialized and focused, and they may have more of an impact or effect, but that doesn't mean that they're more important. So there is that as well. Requiem points out, I think it would be better to say, with your help, I hope we can make this our story instead of saying my table or something along those lines. So that is absolutely, let's throw that in there for now. With your help, I hope we can make this, I hope that together we can create a story we can all enjoy and be proud of. This is already more inclusive language. So, helpful. The Crosshair says, even in Monopoly, one is the banker or rules checker, but they're playing the same gosh darn game. Yeah, to be fair, that is absolutely true. One day I'm going to have to determine what language I want to use in terms of the difference in importance and whatever for a game master versus players. But I do think that they have, for them, it's about impact. Also, Kate, if you could confirm to me in chat, we will be getting a knock on the door real soon. I run banker like a mob boss, so I'm not allowed to be banker. Thank you. One of these days, I really want to run a Monopoly LARP where the players are playing Monopoly, but the banker is somebody who can be influenced, cheated with, that, you know, people show up in costume, but like anything goes. But the point is to win a game of Monopoly. And if you can do so underhandedly, then go for it. But anyway, moving on. My GM style. So this already, I would also just, you know, I prefer that kind of formatting. I'm not certain that I would put this here, but let's see what we can do with it. Effective over-optimization. I believe any character build is viable as long as it's intentional and complementary to your teammates. This is essentially saying you have to play something that will fit in with the party. Real Brick Wall has mentioned, in regards to party diversity, all my PC groups have had major gaps. There we go. Just buzzing somebody in. Have had major gaps. It's never been an issue for me. I'm not a perfect GM, but group diversity is not hard to GM for. Overlapping groups do mean the players will be competing over spotlight when they shouldn't be sometimes. This is the kind of thing that I think is very dangerous to put in a written document, because it is essentially saying, I need you to complement each other, which is really kind of something that you can kind of encourage them towards, because it also makes it seem like if you ever have anything overlapping at all, this is a problem, and I don't like that. Pukajuice says this sounds anti-min-max, but also contradicts itself if it is. I would take this right out, because if I had to put something in here, I would say play whatever you like, or rather more along the lines of you do not need to optimize your build. But this is a silly thing, I think, to put in a piece of paper. I would kind of just want to encourage people to be like, play what you want to, because I also don't want to imply that players who do want to optimize their characters shouldn't. Admittedly, if you come to me with a sheet that's completely min-maxed and tricked out and abusive, I will flag it. Or if you come to me with a character that has so many highs and so many lows and they're unsupported, I might say, this isn't conducive to telling a great story. We can try to work on it, but I don't think that this belongs. So for this, we'll put this back, but I would straight up take this out. Everyone says, for what it's worth, I think it's worth discussing everything under my GM style, but it's fundamentally incorrect to make any adjustments to this section because the author is setting player expectations authentically. So then that is true. What I'm kind of going over here right now is more like how I would, whether I agree or disagree, but what's more important is, do I think that this is necessary to communicate to players? And I don't think this is. I think that this is essentially creating a scenario where you are building stress into your document by being like, these are things that I expect of you. And I don't think that this is something that's huge to expect from somebody. I think that you can very easily just make sure that people know, play what you like. Play what you like, but maybe pay attention to what other people are playing as well. But this is also the kind of thing that's, if you ever run into a situation where you're like, okay, do you want to play soccer or football, depending on where you are in the world? Great. Well, you should know that if you play soccer, there's a chance that you could collide with a goalpost and crack your head open and die. It's true, But why would you open with that information? And also, couldn't you reasonably expect that somebody who wanted to play football with you would know not to charge into a goalpost? So while you might want to say like, hey, just be careful out there, that's great. Fantastic. Be careful out there. Kate, just to check, I think there's salad in with it, so you might want to take the salad out. I don't know if we want salad sitting in the warmth, but we'll see. But yeah, so if you're playing soccer or football, you don't immediately start saying every possible thing that could go wrong. And I don't think that this is something that I would include personally in a document like this. It might be true, but not sure. I like meaningful choices. Build a character that is consistent in their character choices and fits with both their backstory and the campaign setting. Once again, good advice. I wouldn't include it. Build a character that's consistent in character choices and fits with their backstory and campaign setting is kind of like, it's once again, it's warning something about something that could go wrong before they have the chance to do it, but it's a bit obvious. If a player comes to me and says, like the example that I've used in the past is somebody who came to me in a LARP and said, I want to play a character who's a cabinet maker. And then they had melee 5, and I asked, why do you have the highest rating of melee possible? And they were like, oh, because, I just enjoy sword fighting and I practice sometimes. Yeah, not consistent with your character backstory. That's an issue, but that's something that's going to come up when you present your character to me. If I start saying you have to be able to justify what's on your sheet, then it's going to force players to start thinking about like everything I put on my sheet has to be justified. And I don't want to stress them out that much. So, Aragorn says this, which I think is actually an interesting point. I have some pretty hard line stances that I think correlate with this bullet point when I'm running a game. Specifically, I do not want non-heroic characters, and you, as a player, must want your character to work with the other PCs, even if the character must be convinced. These are things that I think might be worthwhile mentioning to a group that's new to role-playing, or at least intermediate level to role-playing. Like if you're brand new to role-playing, then you shouldn't be handing them the sheet of paper at all. You should be like talking with them. But something like I do not want non-heroic characters. I think that's great. I think that first of all, that would belong down here in player expectations or recommendations. So we'll come back to it. But I think that saying I don't want non-heroic characters really is a good thing to put, because every once in a while I'll get somebody who will like, yeah, I want to play this guy who like sits around and he's sort of like chews nachos and doesn't really want to go out and adventure or do anything, but he kind of has to. And immediately I start being like, this sounds like an excuse for you to essentially refuse to do what the other players want to do and justifying it through your backstory. I know that the monomyth includes refusing the call. I don't actually want you to refuse the call, not for an appropriate length of time. So I do think that is actually something that might be worth putting in. So I'm going to put here, play a heroic character, because I think that that's something that might be a little less obvious to people. And your character must be able to work with the other PCs, even if they need to be convinced. Or actually, I like what Aragorn said. As a player, you must want your character to work with the other PCs, even if the character themselves needs to be convinced. Don't autocorrect my themself. Having a lazy character could be an interesting arc. It's true, but the problem is that what we think about as an interesting arc is from a different form of storytelling. as a player character, you are kind of coming forward and collaborating with other people to create a story. And it's not easy to collaborate if you're creating a character who's just like, but I don't wanna, because you're not necessarily instilling any trust in yourself that you're going to go forward and create the story. It's kind of like creating that loner character who doesn't want to talk to anybody and has a dark past. People see this in fiction all the time and thinks it's super cool. And then it really kind of hurts you when you realize that the pacing of that kind of story depends on that character being able to come and go, that the character is forced to go with you, that the character doesn't have free will because it's usually coming from one author or from a collection of authors who are deciding together. So kind of hurried that time. If you play a character who doesn't want to be on the adventure, you're responsible for providing a motivation for them to be there anyway. True, but there are times where I would actually just be like, I'd really rather that you just be part of this adventure, because I want things to be special for your character. I don't necessarily want you to steal spotlight unreasonably, and stealing spotlight because you don't want to go is a dangerous prospect. It can work, but sometimes it can't. Anyway, I like the world. I generally expect your characters to fit within the world, and the player's guide will give you hints about how to fit in with the story. Once again, this is not about your GM style. This is about you telling the players, you have to fit in with my world. Saying I'd like you to be thematically on point, that is something that makes more sense. As an example, if you were playing in a high fantasy setting and you had somebody coming in who's like, yeah, I want to have a skateboard and sunglasses, and I want to say things like real cool dude, and swears and makes references to memes all the time, and it wrecks all the other players' immersions because they're not following the same kind of like genre setting or theme. That is something that I think is worthwhile to point out. I think that makes a lot of sense. But saying I expect your characters to fit within the world, that language is really harsh, because that's not giving you an opportunity to be collaborative. What I would put there instead would be, we should, as a group, come to a consensus about what kind of game we want to play, including theme, genre, mood, etc. I'm not saying this wording is good, but I'm thinking that this is what's meant by that comment. So items, you know what, I won't actually put it in bold. I will also color them. So if it's in this blue, that means that it's something that I've added. That is there. Everyone says, instead of striking out, is the first bullet point maybe better written as, I like all character builds as long as, and as we do character creation, we discuss character intentions and how they'll work with the other characters. So let's see if we can put that in there. When we're creating characters, let's make sure that to discuss everyone's intentions and make sure that the group will work, will all work as a group. I think that this is a useful thing to state. You know, hey, so when we're doing this, let's make sure that we all sort of fit together. But this, the reason why I kind of hesitate to this is because these things are essentially, hey, we should have a session 0. And then if someone says, what's session 0? I can say it's to make sure that we're all, you know, on the same page about things like mood and theme and stuff like that. So that's kind of one of the issues that I have with this contract, as it were. But let's say that this was you posting and being like, I'm a GM, I'm looking for players from a wide group of people. Stating this outright is pretty useful. So there is that. Bullet 2, I like the reasons behind the story you're telling for your character and may ask for clarification on why your character chooses an action. I think that this kind of just overall fits in the doesn't really need to be stated. Saying, hey, you should have justification for why you do things. Yeah, but like that's kind of very basic gaming 101. And that's, if I were to do this, I'd actually write 2 different documents. I'd write the Gaming 101 sheet, which is like, hey, players and GMs, here are the things that you should probably do. And we might actually work on one of those in a future clinic hours. But it wouldn't be in an agreement that I'd want to have signed. That'd be the equivalent of things like if I was making an agreement with somebody to play soccer and being like, so you agree to play soccer, right? Like, yes, that's why we're here. I like crunch. Understanding the rules is important to me. So this is actually something that I believe is worthwhile to mention to people, because there are GMs who are just like, I don't really give a shit about the rules, and I don't really want rules lawyers to show up to my table because I just do what I want. And I think that's important to let people know. I think there are some GMs who are like, I follow the rules in the book to an alarming degree, and I expect that everyone's okay with that. So I do think that this is the sort of thing that if you were trying to make people aware about your GM style, that would belong in here. But then this would be, here are my feelings towards how rules, towards the rules of, no, hold on. Here's how I feel about adjudicating rules. So I'm going to make this into a different color because I think this one actually belongs in this section. Because I think that this is actually an important point to make. The crosshair echoes what echoes my point. This is actually the first my GM style point for me in the whole thing. I'm kind of iffy about splitting this up into different sections anyway. I mean, I am too, but this is basically saying like, look, if you want to play with me, you should know this is how I deal with rules. Like if I was writing this sentence, I'd be like, I definitely enjoy rule systems. I'll change them when I have to in order to make sure that the story moves forward. I hope you're okay with that. And then I would find out how other people felt. If Scott came to me and said, look, I really appreciate it when the rules are always run exactly to the letter, then I can negotiate with him and be like, sometimes I just can't do that. Especially if I could say, this is a streamed game and I can't adjudicate all rules perfectly because I can't spend 45 minutes of a 3-hour stream looking in a rule book. That makes for a lousy stream. Then we can come to a compromise. But if Scott comes to me and says, rules are the most important thing to me in a game, and if Kate comes to me and says, I hate rules and I never want to pick up a rule book ever, well, now we have a problem. And this might be an indication that we have players who are incompatible. So this is in a way the GM stepping forward and saying like, look, I'm the referee and this is how I plan to ref. And I think that is actually a useful thing to state. I'm only human. I'm going to make mistakes or bad calls. I'm just trying to make the best decisions I can. Understanding the rules would be a huge help to me and takes some of the pressure off. Well, I think that this is, again, something that that is a useful thing for people to know. But I wouldn't say this as I'm only human. I'm going to make mistakes or bad calls. I'm just trying to make the best decisions I can. Understanding the rules would be a huge help to me and take some of the pressure off of me. I would change this. Again, I don't think this has to do with GM style, but I would change it as follows. I would say I don't expect anyone to be perfect at this table. We all need to help each other out, even when mistakes or bad calls are made. And I don't think that this is something that is necessarily wrong to let people know. But I think that making this more collaborative and saying like, we just got to be there for each other is much more important than you have to be there for me. Your choices have consequences. Keep in mind that, can you pin that, Aragorn? When we get to there, I think that'll be, oh no, is that? Okay, it's sort of mentioned elsewhere, but let's deal with it now. As a GM, I expect you to know how your character abilities work, and I can meet with you between sessions if you have questions. Follow on my declarations before session 0. So this is something that I think is a bit more GM specific. I don't actually require this of my players as much. I don't say like, you got to know how everything works, but I do expect, I guess I do expect people to at least have a reasonable idea of how the game works before we start. And if you don't, then we should get together and run some practices and find out. But I do think that this is the kind of thing that I would put, because look, here's the thing. As we go through this, spoilers, I wouldn't do a contract at all if this was just a normal tabletop game. I would come up with a contract for, like I said, a professional game. But I think that it is worth us coming up with like, hey, are you a new player? Here's the shit that you should just know about. And it might be worth kind of putting that out there. And that's one of the things that I would say. You don't necessarily need to know everything. I expect you to have at least made an effort to learn. And if the best way for you to learn is by doing, then we should meet before the game starts. I recognize that for some people, reading from a book is tough. Maybe you have difficulties reading. You could be dyslexic. You could just have short attention spans. For some people, they learn far better by listening to somebody else. For some people, they learn far better by doing. All of these are appropriate, but I'd rather that we tried to learn not while we're in the middle of a game with other players who may have already mastered it, because then essentially we're slowing the game down for you, when what we could have done is said, hey, why don't we all get together and figure this out in advance? And so in advance is a lot easier. Now, I don't insist on this for every rule, right? If you're like, how do grapple rules work again? I'm not going to throw my hands up in the air and be like, oh my God, how do you not know how grapple works? But if it's a basic thing like, so what die do I roll? You roll a d20. Okay. But if I have to answer this question 8 times over the course of the first session, I'm going to feel like you didn't actually bother to try to learn how to play the game beforehand. If you don't have time to learn how to play beforehand, talk to me and we'll work something out. But I'd rather not be teaching basics to one player when every other player at the table doesn't need those basics. So what we do for us at RPG Clinic is that we actually run practice sessions with the mechanics before we stream. Everybody is learning. Sometimes it's because we just have to remember things from the past because it's been a while since we played. Sometimes it's because we haven't played the game before. Sometimes it's to find out where the choke points are going to be for the stream itself. But we run several practice sessions, and we sometimes run practice sessions in the middle of game to shore up things where we're like, oh yeah, we're all a little shaky on this point. But the point is that we're not doing this in the middle of the game session. We're doing this outside of game sessions so that we know what the expectations are. I do think that it is important for you to make an effort to know how to play the game, but you can work with me in a way to find out how best to play the game. It's because then you get something like this happening. Pugajutsu says, I was removed from a table for not keeping up with players that were far more knowledgeable of the game. If See, the thing is, I wouldn't want it to get to that point. I would work with you already to make sure that you could get up to speed, but I would do it at a time that's more appropriate than in the middle of game. Or at least I'd try to do that as much as possible. And I think that there are some responsibilities on the GM to do this, and I think there are responsibilities on the player to do this. I do have experience, even recent experience, although not with RPGClinic people, where I would run a game and people would show up and just be like, I don't know how to do this. And it's kind of like, well, I know you had the book because I gave it to you. I know I told you the sections that would be a good idea for you to read up on. I asked you if you had any questions before the game a couple of days ago, and you said no. And now you're showing up and you don't know what you're doing. That sucks. Like, it really does suck. And it is a dangerous thing to say, like, hey, yeah, no, beginners are welcome. I want beginners to be welcome at my game. I don't want to deal with it while everybody else is there, because you're going to feel badly about it, and I'm going to feel badly about it, and the other players are going to feel badly about it. So, if we're going to put that in there, that being said, let's all make sure that we have a basic understanding of the rules before we start play. We can work together to learn the rules if necessary outside of game sessions would be what I would put personally. Pook says, yeah, I had basic knowledge and the players are definitely the kind to find where the rules bend, and that's fine if that's what they wanted to play, but that was spun as me not being as invested in the game as they were. See, like, that is, so I will say this. If like most of my players were heavily invested in knowing everything about the game, and one of my players was coming in and being like, I just don't care that much, that is true. I may then isolate you as like, are you sure this is the game for you? And if your lackadaisical attitude is actively bringing the game down for everybody else, that's not great. But if you were just never given the chance to get to that point, that's a problem. I think that people should be given that chance. So Aragorn says, ultimately getting started with new characters is a slow process, and there can be hiccups with recalling powers/mechanics. But for me as a GM, I don't have the brain to memorize all of my players' character sheets or abilities along with my NPCs in the world and story. So I need my players to make the effort and or show the interest enough to ask for help outside of game. Exactly. I don't know what all the charms are in Exalted. I don't. There was a time where I would have been fascinated and just read all the charms and started to know them as much as I could off by heart. I don't have that kind of time anymore. I don't have that patience anymore. I expect my players to know what their charms do. I expect them to also have access to those charms so that they can look it up. And they do. They all have ways that they can check their charms. I can adjudicate things, and if they mention a charm and they have questions about how that charm works, I'll look it up. But I trust my players to be able to adjudicate them without my having to check their math, because I don't have time to check their math on this kind of stream. So. Requiem says, I like to tell my players, granted they tend to be a bit more experienced, but so long as they're putting in the effort, then we are cool. So I had Dex Melee is so much better than what do I do here, in my opinion. Yep. I don't want to have to explain how the rules work. I definitely don't want to explain how the rules work in the middle of game if it feels like you just never made any effort to learn. Moving on. Your choices have consequences. Keep in mind that my goal is to make the world and the people feel like a living world and are not just there for your benefit. Finding ways to learn their motivations, likes, dislikes to appeal to them will benefit you. I feel like this is basic roleplay shit. That sounds more dismissive than I mean it to. But one thing that I will say is that I would prefer that this fits under the catch-all of... I don't want you to be struck out. Stop being struck out. Word. I would say I prefer a narrative driven game as opposed to a war game. And I'd put that in there and I would be like, there it is. If you have any questions, you can come to me with them. But I think this kind of is a catch-all for a lot of, I want you to have justification for things on your sheet. I want you to interact with people in the world. I want you to try to find things out. I want you to not treat this game as just a series of puzzles to be solved. I think that that's, if I was just stating my preferences, that's what I would say. I prefer a narrative-driven game as opposed to a war game. Now, you can come at me, because I definitely do enjoy the game aspects of the game, but I think that that's enough to say that. That if you're really talking about your GM style, in this case, what I would say is, if I was describing my GM style, I prefer narrative-driven games as opposed to war games, but I still do enjoy playing with the rules. I should point out that I will bend rules for the sake of expediency, especially when it comes to streaming. And I'm not above house ruling things if necessary, but in general, I prefer to stick to what the rules are. And I also just want to make sure that everybody knows that as a GM, I want all of us to work together to create a great story. And that's about all I need to say to describe my basic GM style. If I wanted to get into like the real nitty gritty of this sort of thing, I don't think a contract is the place to do it. Requiem Lost saying, your choices of consequences seems a bit aggressive to me. Makes it seem like, hey, don't fuck it up. Perhaps your actions can affect the world for better or worse. Repost, hit enters too soon. Yeah. Okay, so if we move on to player expectations or recommendations, have fun. Although I'd like you guys to take this seriously, it is just a game and should be a fun experience. So I think that this is one of the most important things that you can put on a contract. I think I would just change it to, we're all here to have fun. Everything we do should be in the service of everybody at the table having a good time. That's what I would put if I wanted to put have fun. Because this is very important. But I don't need to say, like, I need you to take this seriously. Maybe that's not the kind of game for it. If I run Paranoia, I don't want anybody to take anything seriously. If I'm running a really gritty, like, I don't know, vampire game, maybe I don't want people to make goofy, crazy, weirdo vampire jokes all the time. If I don't disagree with the premise of a written statement of intended expectations, the one thing this document is really missing is, here are the house rules I use. Like I said, I think at some point it would be useful for us to come up with a list of tips that I think players should know before going into a game. But I don't think that I would have that as like I need you to agree to this. But I am rewording some of these things because I want it to be more inclusive. I want it to be like, not this is what I expect from players, but this is what we all need to do. I'm trying to find out what would go into a contract. Where do I plan to put this contract up after I'm done with it? I guess I could upload it to a Google Doc so that people can see it. I was not the original author of this. I should point out if you're just tuning in, this came from a tweet. But I will be, like, for the record, I wouldn't use one of these things. I wouldn't use a contract unless I was hiring myself out as a professional. Then I might want to have a contract out there. But I'm trying to see what the language is in here, how I would change it, and then we'll do a complete pass. I might not be able to get it done in the 2 hours that we have for the stream, but we'll see. But yeah, I think this is incredibly important. You know what? I'm actually going to throw this out there right now because this is something that's incredibly needed. Any contract has to have a discussion of safety tools, red rule, lines and veils, safety cards, etc. I have no idea why this isn't like front and fucking center. I don't play games without these anymore. And the only reason I played with games without them is because I was dumb enough to not realize that they were necessary. But then again, everybody was. Like, I can't just blame myself here. So yeah, in a contract, house rules, safety tools, but I would also want to make sure that, hey, if you're playing one of my games, this is actually one of the other major things that I would want people to know, is that I expect if you are sitting down at a role-playing game with me, and this is an expectation, this is something that I'd be comfortable saying, like, if you're playing with me, I expect this to be true, is we're here to make sure that everybody has a good time. That's what we're trying to do. We can't always succeed. We cannot always succeed. There are going to be times where someone is just not going to have as much fun as somebody else. I get that. We can't be perfect. But the point is, we are not here to make sure that I have a good time. We're here to make sure that we have a good time. Theoretically, I could do the safety tools as an addendum or separate item. Safety tools goes right at the fucking top. This is a non-negotiable point for me at this point. The games that I play, depending on where they are, can deal with mature subject matter. I do not shy away from many topics personally, but I want to know if you need me to shy away from those topics so that I won't touch them. I also will make absolutely sure that everybody's there is going to be okay with the idea that safety tools are there and are to be used when necessary. Because if you show up to a game that I'm running and you are like, safety tools, that's stupid, then you're out. Like, I'll try to talk you into it, but if you're not willing to play by these rules, you're done, son. You're gone. Because otherwise, I would have to make my game so bland and milquetoast that I wouldn't have fun running it. I'm not saying that like the only way that I can love a game is if it was edgy and hardcore. Absolutely not. But like, without safety tools, I don't know whether it's okay for me to have a character flirt with one of your characters. I don't know if it's okay for me to bring up, insert any number of fantastical creatures here. I don't know if it's okay for me to even shake your hand. Safety tools mean that it's okay. But without safety tools, we're fucking nothing. I want to feel comfortable referring to a surfer's gooch when I need to. Absolutely. Be effective. Have an idea of how your character behaves during combat exploration and downtime. Figure out how your build works with the party and can complement it. Make choices that enhance your character's tactics. So, aside from the fact that this isn't one of my recommendations, this is a section which I think is really not only is it not necessary, I think this is actively harmful. This makes it seem that I'm saying, if you aren't excellent at optimizing, you do not belong. And I don't think that's correct. I don't think that you necessarily have to be optimized. I do think that it's important that you can complement the rest of the group, but in much the same way as we said above. We have to make sure that we come to a consensus about the game we want to play, and let's make sure to discuss everyone's intentions and make sure that we're all work as a group. And work as a group includes things like, hey, maybe if we're a party and, I create a fighter and you create the same fighter who fights exactly the same way I do, I kind of don't want to play a character that's exactly the same as somebody else on the field. So that's, to me, a negotiation of just making sure that we'll all work together as a group. But if everybody in the team is like, oh, we all want to be sword fighters, and everybody's happy with all being sword fighters, then fucking all be sword fighters. That's fine. Now, there is an exception to this, and it's an annoying one, but I will bring it up. If you're playing D&D or another game which is very heavily math-oriented, and you make character choices that are not optimal, you are creating more difficulty for your GM. But I still don't think that that's disqualifying. D&D is built around the idea that you have 4 people in your party and that they are spread out among things. It's not like 4 rogues. You're going to have some people who are spellcasters and some who aren't, that kind of thing. So earlier this year I meant something for adjusting a sheet after a number of sessions. See, like, that would be something that I'd include in a contract. You can toss that in there. Well, maybe not as big as this. Hey, you can change your sheet up to change anything on your sheet up to the 4th session is what I do for my games. If you picked something and you fucked it up and you want to change it, I want to let you change it. So everybody wants to play a bard. Everybody can play a bard. Like, I think that's fine. I'm okay with that. I just wouldn't be okay with that if somebody was like, but I don't want to play the same thing as everybody else. Well, then we'll find out how we can do that. Zesty says safety is first in all engineering, even story creation. Yeah, pretty much. Pukajutsu says your choices have consequences is a bit of a loaded statement, but it's dependent on game size, in my humble opinion. Telling that to a group of 3 to 4 players sounds like you're going to come down on them. Running a LARP or a larger persistent world game, you have to be hardline on some of the rules, like, hey, don't blow up the shared space, yo. I think that this is honestly quite true, and this is sort of balanced for the kind of game that you're running. Saying your choices have consequences actually makes a difference in games where there's PvP, which is a lot of LARPs. Because what I don't want is for somebody to come in and be like, yeah, I assassinated the prince. And then if every other player decides to kill him, they're like, whoa. But like, that's my character. Like, you can't kill me for playing my character. And I'm like, yes, but there's 499 other people here and they want to play their character too. And if you can't operate in the boundaries of the society that this group has sort of agreed to, then you have to face the consequences of your actions. I think that makes sense. So that I think is something that is a very good point. Your choices have consequences is kind of a truism. Like, yes, if your choices didn't have consequences, then you're playing Mass Effect 3. Hey-oh! Okay, sorry, never mind. That's actually completely unfair. But if you're saying your choices have consequences, then yes. Otherwise, we would not make choices. They wouldn't be interesting for us to play. But it's more important to remind people that, like, just because you think a choice is good doesn't mean that everyone else has to agree to it if there's player versus player allowed. Scandalo. Stream got spicy. So be effective. I don't like any of this. But that's just me, right? If you as a GM want to say, like, I expect you to do this, then I think that you could say specifically things like, you know, I want you to treat this like the war game that it will be. I think that you can say that, and that's a personal preference thing. But this is kind of presented as like, these are the rules that everybody needs to sort of agree to in the original tweet. The original tweet specifically asked the question, if a GM gave you this for a home game before playing a session with them, what would you do? And it's sort of, it didn't make a mention of like, this is what I'm giving my players, would you play in my game? This is more like, if any GM gave this particular thing to you, how would you feel about it? And I'm here to tell you that I'd feel pretty shitty about it, to be honest. But this is something that I wouldn't say. I think that it would be important to include, I'm running a war game, so you'd better play it properly, is something that you might want to put in, but I wouldn't. I don't believe that this is something that should be a universal rule. So this is actually a really interesting point to make. A softer way might be, have something to do during combat so you don't just look at your phone 2 hours if we're doing combat. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to put it in another text file, which you can't see, because this would go in my, like, things that you should be aware of when you're a player in a game. I think that's a tip that should absolutely go in there. But it wouldn't just be about combat. It should be like, you should be comfortable with the idea that in something that's going to happen regularly in a game, you should be comfortable that your character has something to do. Because if it's a game that's all about like political intrigue and you've built a character that all they know how to do is fight, you're running into the same issue. If a large portion of the game is going to be something that your character does not want to engage with at all, you're going to run into a problem. I brought this up at the beginning of changing the streaming because we had one character, Sophia, who was miserable at combat. And I was like, I can't just not have combat in this game. And Liz made it very clear of what her intentions were with the character when it came to combat. And then over the course of the game, she ended up being one of the most effective characters in combat. But she had a plan and she knew what she wanted to do and she was okay with the idea of combat. That, to me, is a sign of a player who thought ahead and figured shit out. But it is something that you have to be aware of, because if you come to a game and you're like, oh, I'm a pacifist, I don't want to fight ever, and then as soon as combat breaks out, you're like, ugh, and then you just like sit back and cross your arms and make everybody feel guilty about doing combat, it sucks. Really sucks. Dice Towers for 2 hours. Be engaged, pay attention, participate, contribute. Figure out what you already know, understand the situation, talk to other players to learn what they know or get their input on the situation. So here's the funny thing. This stuff is Gaming 101, and I wouldn't include it. This is important. If you're playing in a game, whether you're a storyteller or a player, you should be engaged with it. It is something that I absolutely despise, I have to admit, when I'm playing with people, is if I see somebody be like, okay, so yeah, I'm gonna swing with my sword and I do 4 points of damage. Like, get the fuck out of here with that. I want you to be engaged with the game as a whole. If your character is not part of a scene, I want you paying attention. And that's me. There are certain games where this is okay. Like if you're running an online game and everybody just sort of assumes that like, yeah, if it's not your turn, you can totally just like chat with other people elsewhere. Okay, that's fine. But I do think that it is a worthy thing to say, if you're playing in this game, you're playing to be engaged with everybody. It sort of tags on to, we're here to make sure that everybody has a good time, which means that you're not just focused on yourself. Pook, I desperately want to hear your rant. Please rant. Kaylin says, I'd add talk in character and out of character to other players. Yeah. But this falls into my, I prefer a narrative driven game, right? If I'm like, I want you to talk to each other, that falls in with that. So, and if you understand this and you're on the phone, flash the yellow card to let folks know that it's important to deal with. So Crosshair, if you need to be on your phone, that's totally fine. Like, I don't have a problem with it, because also sometimes like you'll see Kate on her phone during game and it's actually because she's looking stuff up for the game, or she's reading chat, or she's doing something that's expected. But if you're just sort of like, you know, taking yourself out of the game constantly to look stuff up on Wikipedia or to find out what's happening with, you know, the hockey game or whatever, well, then I'm less annoyed. It's more about that specific topic and not the agreement itself. But I want to hear, Pook. Tell me at least what the topic is. And tell me whether you disagree with me, because that's important. Communication is key. If you have questions, ask. You have comments, say it. So long as it's respectful, it's all right. This gets into another thing that I would add in here. Everybody should, when possible, use their word hole. So I'm putting in italics because it's important to note that I don't want to be like, you should talk about everything. That's not easy for some people to do. For a lot of people, it can be really difficult to bring up conflict. And I don't want to be like, if you don't bring up every conflict, then you're a bad player. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that the most effective way often to solve your problems is to actually bring up the problem and work to deal with it, which is why I'm constantly telling people to use their word hole on this channel. But I also recognize that it's not the easiest thing to do, which is why I would never force people to use their word hole. I just encourage them to. Tell a story. Figure out cool, interesting ways to share pieces. Know what things you're open about. Dropping clues or hints about your backstory. So figuring out cool, interesting ways to share pieces of your character and backstory. This is way too basic. Doesn't need to be there. Remember that we're also trying to trim this down. Saying like you should try to be cool. Yeah, that's not something that I feel is appropriate to put in one of these pieces of paper. It might be good advice, but not in something like an agreement. Know what things you're open about and things you want to save until later. Again, this is just a handy tip for players. That's not something that I think is like an expectation. Dropping clues or hints about your backstory / motivations will encourage others to ask questions. This, if I could put 2 strikes through it, I would do it, because that's just wrong. Or not wrong, it's misleading. I can't guarantee that anyone's going to give a fuck about your character background. This section is labeled expectations or recommendations. So the thing is, a contract is not the place for recommendations. That I think is the other thing. If this is an agreement that we're going to deal with, a recommendation is just like, hey, I recommend that you do this. It doesn't belong in an agreement. It belongs in a tips and tricks page, an addendum that you might want to add to it, but it's not part of an agreement. Because if I'm like, hey, I recommend that you play a fighter, but if I put that in a contract, I'm basically saying play a fighter or I'm going to be disappointed in you. So that's part of the issue that I have with this. And part of the issue I think with a lot of the discussion that we're having here is that a lot of these things are good tips, but they're not something that I would be like, my GM handed this to me. Like, I'd honestly be insulted. Not insulted. I'd be amused if you handed this to me and be like, oh, recommendations on how to play. Like, I've been role playing for a very long time. I know how I choose to play. I don't need recommendations like figure out cool ways to share your character and backstory. Like, I just don't. But like, I think that that's a useful resource to give people who want it. But if you're like, hey, you have to agree to these things in order to play with me, then I'd be like, well, now I'm insulted that you think that like, what, I have to agree to be cool with my character and to know things that I'm open about and things that I want to save. Like, I would just straight up be like, nah, I'm good. I don't need it. I realize that this is slightly hot take-ish, and I don't think that you have to agree with me on this, but for me, an agreement or a contract is not the place for you to start teaching me how to play. It's about saying, this is what I am looking for and what you're looking for. Because if you're teaching me how to play, that's an entirely different thing. That's a document that I absolutely want all of us to work on together. And I think that might be another RPG clinic. Maybe not the next one. Maybe the next one. We'll see. But that's something that I believe is a really appropriate thing. And I would love to see, like, what are the things that you would put in a 1-page? Here are the things that you should know about running and playing. A 5-page, here are the things you should know about running and playing, or a handbook about things that you should know about running or playing. I think all of those are really interesting topics, but not for an agreement. That's where I'm running into some like etiquette issues, because this is essentially saying you have to agree to be a good role player. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? For instance, give short descriptions when you do things, especially new things. Again, this can be a good tip, but the way that it's described is very aggro to me. Things like stunts, I've told my players that, like, hey, if you're stunting and exalted, you should be able to get it out in 30 seconds or less, preferably 10 seconds or less. Like, if it takes you a really long time to do it, you're just sort of like building and building and building and gilding and gilding and gilding the lily, then in fact, you're doing the opposite. You're not letting us continue on with the game, so it's boring. It's not exciting for anybody. So yeah, sometimes it is a good idea to give short descriptions, but sometimes if I read this, I might interpret it as like, when it's your turn to speak, you have 2 sentences and that's all you get to do. Like, that's not fair and not appropriate for some things. If I'm like, okay, so my character wakes up, wakes up, turns out of bed, stands up, walks to the bathroom, turns on the sink, washes the right hand, washes the left hand, sits down on the toilet, opens their phone, reads their phone, like that's way too much description, obviously. But if I'm like, okay, my character's going to get ready and then I'm going to head out towards the castle. And as I'm walking towards the castle, I'm really feeling like I'm striding forward with like purpose. My head's held high in the air, and everybody who's surrounding me, I'm saying like, hey, how's it going? And I'm here to fight for you, the people. Like that still took longer than just saying I go to the castle, but that's contributing to the game. So this is a dangerous thing to put forward of give short descriptions when we do things, especially new things. This is the kind of thing that I would want dealt with not on paper. I would want it, this is one of those unwritten rules, because I want it to be dealt with specific examples in person if it comes up. Aragorn says, I interpreted this example. Hey, featured chat, don't be a jerk. There we go. Aragorn says, I interpreted this bullet point as don't take forever to say things, but instead as, not as don't take forever to say things, instead as give a short description of what you're doing instead of saying, yeah, I cast magic missile, rolls dice and shuts up for the rest of the round, with the caveat that you don't need to describe it every time if you consistently perform action. So like, I didn't read it that way, and that's actually a perfectly reasonable way to interpret it, but it means that it's vague. I would say, instead of this, I'd write, be descriptive. But let's keep the game moving. When describing your actions, but let's keep the game moving. I would put it that way. But again, I really feel like this is the kind of thing that I would sort of be like, this is more something that I want to engender as a, hey, if this isn't happening in the game, I'll bring it up. I've done it before. I've been like, hey, so how are you doing this action? Because I'm encouraging my players to stunt. But I don't kind of want to be like, you will agree to perform at least a level 1 stunt for every single one of your actions. Like, kind of. So, be the drama, be the hero. Again, this is really good advice. I'm not sure that this belongs in an agreement. I think that this falls under play a heroic character. But this is the kind of thing that I just, it's like a tip that I would give players. Like, hey, you're the hero. Go ahead and do heroic things. Like, it's okay to push boundaries. You should know that it's fine to go hard. It's okay to do things that are big actions. You don't have to be tentative. But these are sorts of things that, like, if you're playing a survival horror game, then that advice is pretty bad. But if you're playing a game of Exalted where you're expected to do that sort of thing, then that is really good advice. So in this particular case, I don't necessarily think that this is a universal tactic, but I would say things like, don't be afraid to be the protagonist of this story. But again, this is a tip. And I don't really think that a tip is what I want it to be. Episode 59 of Changeling Streaming, everyone was so young back then. Yeah, it happens. Do you mean CTS or do you mean Exaltwitch? When it's on a contract page as a player, I'd read that as, if I'm not great at explaining my actions all the time in detail, I'm not good for this game. On the description bit, everything that's on a contract reads as mandates after all. And that's true. Some people just don't have that flair for description. So, can I note that be the drama and actions have consequences are in the same document? Yeah, that's entirely true. That's entirely true. So I would then say that as a tip, yeah, don't be afraid to be the protagonist of the story, because you shouldn't be, right? You can take the lead. But again, this is not something that belongs in an agreement. I mean, none of these things do. I should stop striking things out because I'm striking out most of the things, but engage with other characters to learn about the story they're trying to tell. Backstory, reactions, opinions of the current situation, thoughts for the future. How are they feeling? So this is, aside from being awkward phrasing. Yeah, you'll see why I'm striking things out in a second. This is again, like, duh. You know, fail forward. Great tip. Not necessary for an agreement. Because even this is sort of like, if you're trying to set expectations of the kind of game that you want to run, I don't see why you would try to be like, yeah, fail, and then just like give up and go home and never try anything ever again. Like, I don't see why this is necessary as part of like an agreement of this is the kind of game that we're going to run, because this is the sort of thing that I'd be like, this is a natural sort of truism that I think people should be aware of. Help the flow of combat. Okay, so now we're getting into something that this might be something that we can flow into. So know what your character will do on their turn before their turn starts. Good advice. Not sure that it necessarily needs to be in here, but we'll see. Look up feats, spells, abilities, or skills before your turn of the session. Know how they work, and if unclear, then double check with the GM, preferably out of session. This falls into the please know how to play your character. I will help you, but I would prefer to do so outside of sessions. So we've kind of already got this here. But here's the thing. The 15-second rule. If you don't choose what you're going to do within 15 seconds, your turn will be skipped. Putting this down on a piece of paper like this really gives me the no feeling. It's first off, it makes it seem like, what if I have questions about what's happening in battle? What if somebody did something just before I have to act and it's such a huge thing that I have to immediately change what I'm doing? What if I have to look up the rules for an obscure action that I would like to take, but I don't remember what those rules are? What if I, like, all of these things mean that setting a hard time limit is, it's dangerous. I do think that it's worthwhile to tell somebody, like, I expect that you know how combat runs and that you'll do your best to keep combat running at a smooth pace. If it's a game that's very heavily combat focused, then I might be like, yeah, please come prepared with the stuff that you need to make sure that combat will run smoothly. Whether that's like notes for yourself, or whether that's, that you've spent 6 hours studying how to do combat before game, or whether that's that you consult with me and we run some practice sessions first. All of that stuff is kind of important. But to sort of be like 15-second rule. Now, what I have done is occasionally I have had a situation where I'm like, okay, we're at a chase sequence right now. If you're taking too long to decide what's happening, I'm going to move on. But it's just for this moment, and I will be like, and instead of it me being like, you have 15 seconds, go. It'd be more like, okay, so what do you do? Okay, you're taking a little while. What are you going to do? Because otherwise, I think you can just full defend and we'll move on. Right? Like, if I notice that somebody's taking a long time, I can prompt them. But that's kind of a, because also if somebody like has to ask questions and I need to spend 10 seconds explaining it, and then they have to take another few seconds to determine that, I don't want to start being like, well, we had a 15-second rule. Like, I don't want that to be my legacy as a GM. So I think that this falls under the expectation, you know how to play the game. I think that is an expectation, and that's fair. What Kaylin says here, disorganized players, disinterested players piss me off. Like, you should know roughly at least what you're going to do in a combat turn, considering there are 4 to 5 people in front of you. If you're disorganized or disinterested, that is a problem, and I don't want you to do that. If I'm running combat, I need you to be focused and present, but I don't need to put time limits in front of you, especially because that penalizes newer players compared to older players or more veteran players at the game. You might know exactly what every spell your wizard is capable of casting, but if the cleric who's playing next to you doesn't, because they're brand new to D&D, that really sucks if you're like, well, while they're trying to figure out what's happening. What I will do, and you've seen me do it, is that if I notice that the initiative order doesn't matter in that particular instance, I will say, okay, you figure out what you're doing, I'm going to move on. And in that case, what I'm doing is I'm sacrificing a little bit, because I'm basically saying to that player, you don't get to necessarily pay as much attention to what the next player is doing. But I will make that choice if someone's like, oh, I have to figure this out, but it's taking me a little while to sort it out. Okay, I'm going to give you that time, but I'm going to give other people something to do at the same time. But it's okay. The thing that I don't want is for somebody to be like, oh, it's my turn. What did everybody just do? You should be paying attention. So, how much time do I spend on a combat turn? It is entirely at my discretion, which is why I wouldn't put it in an agreement. My agreement would say, my expectation is that you know how to play your character to a decent degree when we're actually in a game session, and that you remain engaged during the game, which are things that I like. Be engaged. It's right there. I didn't cross that out because I think that it's important, but I wouldn't put a time limit because the time limit can vary so much depending on what's going on and what kind of game you're playing. Doesn't need to be in context, but just in reference to the conversation that's going on, it's super useful to a GM if you, as a player, say, well, I was going to do something, but the tables have turned a bit and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do instead, rather than just go, and fall silent. Yep, absolutely. Now, again, that is using your word hole, but the other thing to bear in mind with this sort of thing is, if you're thrown for a loop, you can make the role-playing decision of saying, whoa, that's crazy. Okay, my character is just going to full defend while they try to figure shit out. Like, that's okay. I would encourage players to make suboptimal choices if it was just like, I'm totally flabbergasted about what just happened, so I will, instead of spending the next 5 minutes trying to optimize what my character's next move is, I'm going to do that. Like, that's fine. Totally do that. That's totally okay. And I can also say, just as the Crosshair has said, if the GM asks, do you need a moment? Because some folks are because they're thinking. That's true. You can be like, hey, do we need to take a break? Like, if something major happens, especially something major that might be emotionally resonant for people, that is something that we can take a break and discuss. So there is that. Real Brick Wall says, I'm very frequently caught saying, well, now I can't do the thing I was going to do because I would try to plan based on what I think my party might do, and then I turned out to be wrong because of bullshit like the laws of probability and free will. Very cool. But like, again, if you say, well, I had a plan and I don't have it, at least then you're reminding everybody that you're still engaged. So help the flow of combat, I'm leaving. These I'm taking out for being extraneous, but I think help the flow of combat is covered by other things above. Learn the lore of the world and the people in it. This will help build characters that fit within the themes of the world. Talk with NPCs. This fits right in with be familiar with the game. It's not just mechanics that I need you to be familiar with. I need you to be familiar with the lore of the game as well. You don't have to read every source book. You don't even have to read all of one source book, but I expect you to have a basic understanding about what's going on. And if you need me to, if you're like, I'm not sure I understand everything about this game, I'll gladly sit down with you and we can talk about it. Gladly. We'll get together, we'll grab a drink, and we can discuss the setting of the game. Totally fine. But in the middle of the game is generally not the sort of place to say like, wait, what's a guru? Like, if you're playing werewolf and you don't know what a guru is, then you're not really playing werewolf. You're sitting down at a table with other people and you're lost. So yeah, that is included with, I expect you to be prepared, or find a way to help get prepared. Keep notes. I crossed this out right away. I never want to insist to players that they keep notes. I want the players to be engaged. I think that's important. And if being engaged means that you're taking notes because that's what you need to do, that's fine. But some people don't take notes. Some people don't want to take notes, and I do not want to force them. It's not fucking school. It's not a lecture. And if you don't take notes, then you're screwed. Because also some people don't even take notes when they're in lectures in school. This is basically, yeah, I'm planning to take notes in school. This is basically saying, because I need to take notes, you have to take notes. No. But what you can say, things like keep track of your gear, found items, things you want to buy or sell, make lists of personal group and goals, know what you're trying to do in the story. These are things that might make more sense, but this isn't about keeping notes. Making lists about personal group goals, this isn't something that I would do. I don't need you to write them down, but I do ask my players to be like, I'd like you to have some goals. I'd like you to know what your character wants in the short term and long term. So I think that that is a reasonable thing to be like, I'm going to expect you to at least have thought about this. Absolutely. That's what microphones and recording apps are for. Yup. Aragorn says, I don't insist, but I get annoyed and my feelings are sometimes hurt when someone doesn't take notes and also doesn't remember. It communicates to me that they either don't care or my story isn't good enough to engage. See, like, part of the reason why I don't write the synopses for games is because I want to see what my players remembered. Because if they didn't remember something, then it's something for me to note that either they don't care, or I didn't make it engaging enough, or that there's a source of a different problem here. But I would never want to put something down that says keep notes, because I don't want to insist that people play in that specific fashion. But if I put down everything that I would want people to do so that I wouldn't get sad, that would be too overbearing a document. We do have to make cuts and trims, and we also do have to make sure that we allow some player liberty. Things like keep track of your gear, I think this is totally legitimate. To say, you're responsible for tracking your own character. I don't want to do it. I think that's totally fine to put in a contract. That makes more sense to be like, I'm not going to be your bookkeeper as well. Because I have played in games where players expect me to keep track of everything. And at the end of the day, they'll leave and they'll come back and they'll be like, I forgot my character sheet. And I'll be like, okay, well, without your character sheet, it's going to make it hard for you to roll. Why don't you have your character sheet? And they'll be like, I forgot it at home. Well, that's something that I think is a player responsibility. Eventually, it got to the point where I was like, okay, at the end of the session, everybody gives me their character sheets and I'll put them in a binder. And then I took on that responsibility. I wouldn't want to do that. And I don't want to do that. So yeah, in this case, I think that that's something that absolutely would belong in something like this, in an agreement. Keep track of your gear, which is in fact what I would put is saying, you're responsible for your own bookkeeping as a player. Has anyone ever told you my dog ate my character sheet? No, I have been told my character sheet has been destroyed and therefore I have to remake it. And there has been at least twice that I've been given that excuse because somebody wanted to cheat. And by cheating, I mean, oh, I lost my character sheet or my character sheet has been destroyed, so I have to remake it. And then when they remade it, suspiciously, it was a lot more min-maxed than it was before. So I have seen that. Has anyone ever told me you have beautiful eyes? I mean, unless you're meaning for me to say no, because, it's that obvious. But I have been told that by some very important people. But it's not like it wouldn't hurt to hear it more often. If things seem out of place or stand out to you, write it down. It might be important. This is way too aggro, and this is way too kind of like basic 101 stuff. That's something that I would put in a tips sheet, not in an agreement. Do your best to remember names, locations, objects, etc. Same thing. Thank you, Jonesy Jinx. The Zen of Games, you can't like my dimples that much because I don't have dimples. I have dimple. I only have one. As I've been reminded. Encourage each other to play and shine. So this goes back to we're all here to have fun. Everything we should do is in the service of everybody at the table having a good time. That's absolutely true. This is something that I think can go into an agreement, because that is something that is, I think, even though this is also like a tip for being a good player, I think this is important enough because it's something that involves everybody at the table and not just you specifically about your game. Know when it's appropriate to make jokes and when it's not. That doesn't necessarily need to be there. That's too much. Make sure everyone is sharing their thoughts and role-playing. Definitely true, but I would fold that in with we're here to make sure that everybody is having fun. Everybody should have their share of the spotlight, so I would put make sure everyone has a chance to be in the spotlight. Why did you just change my font? That is so weird. Assuming that others are role-playing. If they are doing / saying things you don't like, assume it's part of that character's personality and deal with it in character. This is too vague and too strange to put in there. I definitely think that being like take in-character actions in character and out-of-character actions out of character is important, but that falls within safety rules. So I wouldn't put that there. I would make it more deliberate about being like, if you're unsure, or like if you're not feeling comfortable out of character, bring it up. Because also, saying assume that others are role-playing puts the onus. It's basically blaming the victim. It puts the onus on everybody, on you to be like, oh yeah, no, this person was doing something that I really didn't like, but it was role-playing, so it was fine. Like, nope, not good enough. If you are uncomfortable, you got to bring it up, and it's up to other people to make you feel comfortable. If somebody is in there and they're saying some things and you're like, whoa, that's horrifying, and you're like, I'm sorry, my character is feels this way, and you're like, oh, it's your character. Well, I'm totally fine with it. I just thought that you felt this way. Then great, you've worked it out. But you might also run into a situation where you're like, I don't really want to sit at a table where your character is dropping the N-bomb all the time, and you're just saying that it's because they're racist, so they get away with it. Like, you can't say, oh, well, he's role-playing, so it's okay. Like, no, it's not good enough. So this is, in fact, double plus bad. Don't like it. Don't like it at all. Do not blame the victim. Do not Google anything about the campaign. Well, okay. So this is kind of a delicate situation here. First off, if you Google anything about my campaigns, you're not going to find anything because I don't run off pre-generated material. But yeah, so what Eller0 says is correct. Just right. Do not cheat. So in a way, this would be important if this was a professional game and I was running a pre-generated module. I'd be like, you agreed to not cheat. I think that is an important thing, and I'd fold that in under fun. I'd also make sure that I was using a lot less blunt language. I'd be like, hey, we're all here to have fun, so let's go out there and have a lot of fun and play fair. So please don't cheat. So that it doesn't seem like I'm accusing anybody of anything. But yeah, it's he's running Paizo Adventure Paths. Okay, well, they gave out a player's guide as a campaign intro. So like this is the sort of thing that you should know about when you're playing something in a pre-generated module. But I would say do not cheat, but I'd also put a question mark next to it because I'm not sure that I'd put that in there. Recommendations. So now we're into recommendations. All of these were supposed to be like expectations, recommendations, and then recommendations. Again, I don't think recommendations have a place in a contract. Have an idea of what class choices feats you'll be making about 1 to 2 levels ahead. This will help you make prerequisite choices as well as speed up leveling up. It's good advice. Doesn't belong here. Also, speed up leveling up unless you're doing that on the fly instead of between sessions. I don't give a fuck if it takes you a long time to level up, but that's on you. Well, Aragorn, don't look up the vulnerabilities of monsters that you're fighting is don't metagame. And metagaming is a form of cheating in a lot of ways. So, build likable characters. The party should want to adventure with you. We've covered this. This is actually something that is important enough to make it into an agreement, because this can shatter a game before it starts. You got to be able to work with the group. The group should also be able to work as a unit together. So this is important. Build effective characters. Pick a concept, choose 2 to 3 things you're very good at, and build around that. This is advice. It goes counter to something that this person has written earlier in the document. It's got to go. Build a diverse party. Using different weapons, armor, skill upgrades will help with splitting up loot and make your party able to handle a variety of situations. This is another way of saying I don't want to have to adjust encounters based on the party. If you're a new GM, this might be worthwhile to mention, like, hey, try to build a balanced party, because that will make it easier on me to be able to run effectively. Super legit. Makes a lot of sense. But what isn't a good thing to point out is if you are an experienced GM, I don't want to have to be like, well, I rolled on the random treasure table and it came up a shield, but none of you use shields. Well, that's bad. But it's your fault for not having a character that likes shields. Like, no, it's fucking not. That's your fault for not being creative enough to give them what they need. So yeah, I don't think that belongs. So wrapping up, here are the takeaways that I have from this. The first is, what we need as a contract is specifically for games that are professional in nature. Professional games are games that have either hired a GM or games that involve so many players that this sort of thing has to be spelled out in advance. So we will, in a future clinic hours, come up with a contract that would work out now that we've kind of gone through all this. So this is still a living document, but here's what I think is important. Let's make sure that everybody can work together as a group. Absolutely. We should all come to a consensus about what kind of game we want to play, including theme, genre, and mood. Absolutely. If it's a game that already exists, like a mass game, like a huge LARP or an online game or whatever, it's okay to spell that out and make sure that people understand the kind of game that they're agreeing to here. Because again, if you're running like a super high fantasy game that's serious, and you have somebody coming in kick flipping on a skateboard, then that person shouldn't be there if everybody else has already agreed to do that. So, mentioning how rules will be adjudicated should probably go into the contract, because this is the sort of thing that can really make or break a game right off the bat. Making sure that people know that everybody's here to help each other out and everybody's there to make sure that everybody at the table has fun is incredibly important and probably should make it into a contract. Making sure that people so we should rule the rules and setting before we start play. Making sure that people have an understanding before we start play, definitely something that I would put in a contract. But I would also be like, we'll work with you to make sure that this is going to happen, right? Instead of being like, it's your responsibility. No, it's everybody's responsibility to make sure that everybody's up to speed. Mentioning the kind of GM that you are, is important because that can shut certain players in or out. But this is the kind of thing that you can, if you're not flexible, you should probably state it. But state it in terms of an I statement of, this is what I like or what I prefer, as opposed to saying this is what it will be. And remember that that's specific to you as a GM. As a player, you want to have your character work with the other PCs, even if the character themselves needs to be convinced. Play a heroic character. That's all something that should be folded in, probably better stated to essentially say, we expect you to try to play properly and to play a game where you are active as a character and work with everyone else. Mentioning things like you can change anything on your sheet up to the 4th session. Useful as an agreement, partially because it softens the blow and doesn't make it feel like it sort of gives somebody something instead of taking away something. But this is the kind of thing that is just sort of like, yeah, so for this sort of game, just understand that you can change anything that you want on your character sheet. Within reason, maybe you can put, but there's that. Safety tools have to be at the top. Mentioning that everyone's here to have a good time is important. Mentioning that everyone has to be engaged is important. Mentioning tell a story, this is more optional, but this should probably be in there to a certain extent of just, like, we're here to tell a story, so let's focus on doing the story. That kind of folds in with engaged and what people need to work together towards and making sure that everybody's having fun. Helping the flow of combat folds into please know the rules in advance and also remain engaged. So important, but I don't know if I'd separate it out. Saying that you're expected to be your own bookkeeping and making a list of personal and group goals. I think that can definitely be in an agreement. Encouraging each other to play and shine, we've covered. An agreement not to cheat if this is for a professional game. Yeah, I think that that's fair to put. And cheating includes metagaming if that's something that you believe that you don't want to have. Things that are missing: house rules, if any, safety tools, player expectations of GM. So that would be something that I'd be like, I want you to be able to say what you expect. I'd want this to be a living document if it's for a small number of people. If I was being hired, I'd be like, what do you expect? Because then I'll know and I can agree or disagree. For a large scale game, they don't get to make that call. There's too many people already. You can't change the game for everyone. So they get to understand that. But that's what I would do. So in a future Clinic Hours, let's build this contract out. Let's actually get a contract. These are the things that we put in a contract, but then let's also find out what are the things that we should make sure that everybody is aware of going into a game. What are the things that people should know, like the basic etiquette of being a player, the basic etiquette of being a GM. Those are things that we should also collect. Some of them were in this document. Others were brought up in chat, but we should absolutely have a look at that. Got to thank Aragwin, Rilberqual, the Crosshair, so much for modding. Also, I believe it was Aragwin, but if anybody else was also helping bringing that stuff up in featured chat, it was a lot of work, and I do appreciate it. I appreciate it so much that I even brought it up when I shouldn't have, because I wanted to get started. That was on me, not you. I apologize for that. I also appreciate the hype train at the beginning and for all of you for sticking out with me for this long. I do know that this was going to be a little bit more contentious, and I appreciate the fact that you might disagree with me about any or all of the things that I've said, and that's okay, except about the safety tools. You should not disagree with me about safety tools. But we are going to see what we can find in the future. But that is the stream. Tomorrow is going to be punchy, probably more Castle Crashers. That's at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over on twitch.tv/Elizabeth A. Neal. Drew Crew at 3 o'clock. There will be a rewatch for Exalt Academy Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern. So tune in for that. That will be interesting. If you can't make the live sessions, but you can make Saturday at 11, tune on in. We'd love to have you. We try to drop in on chat, and it's your time to be able to communicate and have a live experience with other people. Sunday, 6 p.m., Exalt Academy Episode 8. Looking forward to it. Things are starting to get real. But otherwise, thanks so much for being here. And remember, you just got to keep looking up and to the right. Hey, thanks for the follow, Jonesy Jinx. Very appreciated. Come on back for some Exalt Twitch, if you can. We'll see you next time. And use your word hole.